Over 2 days, an FDA advisory panel just heard more than 18 hours of testimony on 7 peptides you've probably heard of. 6 of them passed and 1 didn't. And the reason it didn't is more interesting than you think. I'm Leanne. I have a biology degree, former field researcher for Alaska Fish and Game, and now I spend my time in the peptide research space instead of the Alaskan wilderness. I follow this regulatory stuff closely because it actually matters for anyone paying attention to this space. So let's break down what actually happened at this hearing, and not just the headline version, but the actual version. First, let's get the facts straight because there's a lot of confusion floating around. This hearing was not about FDA drug approval. It was the FDA Pharmacy Compounding Advisory Committee, or PCAC for short, deciding whether 7 peptides should be added to something called the 503A bulks list. That's the list that lets a licensed compounding pharmacy legally prepare a substance with a doctor's prescription, even though it's not an FDA-approved drug on its own. So 7 peptides were up for review. They were BPC-157, KPV, TB500, and MOTS-c on day 1. And then there was Semax, Epitalon, and DSIP or DSIP on day 2. Here's the headline. 6 of the 7 passed. BPC-157, KPV, and TB500 each passed 8-6 with 1 abstention. Here's the headline. 6 of the 7 peptides passed. BPC-157, KPV, and TB500 each passed 8-6 with 1 abstention. MOTS-c passed 7-5. Cmax passed 8-5, and Epitalon passed 7-4. Only 1 DSIP, also called Amideltide, got voted down 6-7. 1 vote. That's how close it was. Now, here's what I actually find most interesting. Not the vote count, but what actually happened in the room. Over the 2 days, more than 24 speakers testified, doctors, lawyers, and peptide industry voices, and nearly all of them argued for wider access. Dr. Anant Benjamuri, Chief Medical Officer at Hims & Hers, testified about the gray market problem. He mentioned a colleague sending him a photo of Bodega in Queens selling peptides. Dr. Halim Mohammed from Game Day Men's Health made the safety argument directly as a physician. His job is to keep patients safe. And right now, patients are getting these compounds from unregulated sources with zero oversight. And here's a name you might recognize. If you've been following my content, Gary Brecka actually testified at the hearing, and his argument was a bigger picture. Tens of millions of Americans are already using peptides. Millions more are coming. And this isn't really a question of whether people will use them. It's a question of whether they'll get them safely. But it wasn't one-sided. Nina Zeldes, a researcher with Public Citizens Health Research Group, testified against including BPC-157, arguing its benefits are largely anecdotal and that a lot of interest is being driven by people who financially benefit from more demand. And it's worth noting, several committee members who voted yes have ties to telehealth companies that would financially benefit from wider peptide access. That's a real conflict of interest that's part of this story, too. If you want me tracking this kind of regulatory news as it develops, drop a comment if you want me to go deeper on any of these peptides individually. So why was DSIP turned down? Honestly, the vote was really close. It was close enough. It was 6-7. That it doesn't point to one clean reason. FDA's own scientists had actually recommended against all 7 peptides going in. citing insufficient safety and effectiveness evidence across the board. The committee overruled that recommendation for 6 of them. DSIP, or DSIP, was simply the one where the committee's internal judgment split against it instead of for it. And here's the part everyone needs to understand. None of this makes any of these 6 peptides legal to compound right now. A PCAC vote is a recommendation, not a rule. And the FDA still has to run months, realistically closer to a year, of a formal rulemaking before anything changes for compounding pharmacies. This was a big step. It was not the finish line. So, what do you do with the information today? Nothing changes yet. For anyone still relying on gray market sourcing, that landscape is unchanged right now. What this vote does tell us is where the regulatory winds are blowing. And it's worth watching closely over the next several months as the formal rulemaking process plays out. This is exactly why I think the research first approach matters so much in this space. Not chasing hype, not assuming a headline means more than it does, and just tracking what's actually happening and telling you the truth about it. If this breakdown was helpful, comment DM, and I'll keep you posted as the rulemaking process moves forward.